Welcome, everyone, to Heartbeat Theater. This is your host, C.P. McGregor, inviting you to be the guest of the Salvation Army for the next half hour. Our star this week is Monty Margetts. When a group of energetic women get together, things usually start happening, as our story this week will prove. Its title, The Remarkable Incident at Whitney Hills, and includes, among other things, a woman with a penchant for finding missing persons and a victim of amnesia, who, by a very human mistake, greatly benefits the community of Whitney Hills. Written for Heartbeat Theater by Christopher Young and starring Monty Margetts, here is Act One of The Remarkable Incident at Whitney Hills.
Wonderful evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Kane. Good night. Good night, Mrs. Norman.
We'll get together next week, Mrs. Norman. What a crowd.
We had 100% turnout.
Oh, it never fails, Major. The Home League meets in that barn of a recreation hall, and we're lucky if half of the girls come. But one meeting in my tiny living room, and not one member has so much as an ingrown toenail that keeps her away.
Come on, I'll help you rearrange things.
I wouldn't think of it.
I never get to sleep right after a meeting anyway. Besides, I want to talk to you.
Well, in that case, you man the cups and saucers, and I'll scrape the plates.
I think I had a brainstorm this evening.
Uh-oh.
Now, what do you mean, uh-oh?
Oh, nothing. Only every time Major Long gets a brainstorm, poor Mrs. J gets calluses on her feet.
Well, your part in this particular brainstorm would be purely voluntary, Mrs. J.
Now, where have I heard that before? Fire away, Major.
Mrs. Henry Cortland.
Our town's new woman of mystery? What about her?
Well, she holds the key to a circle in the Whitney Hills section.
Oh, it's been a long day. You'll have to elaborate. Meanwhile, I'll wash, you dry.
All right. Now, what do we know about Mrs. Cortland?
Why, practically nothing.
And that's the secret of her success in Whitney Hills. She descends out of nowhere. She has enough money to pay cash for the Eberly Mansion, a place that cost so much there wasn't another family even in Whitney Hills who could afford it.
Who have you been talking to?
Mr. Snow, the real estate man who sold it to her. So far as I know, he's the only man in town who's ever seen her. 3 months go by. Mrs. Cortland remains in her castle, politely refusing all invitations, reportedly still mourning over the death of her husband just before she moved to town. Presto, a woman of mystery. Without having met a soul, she's the undisputed ruler of the Whitney Hills clan. She could start a revolution, and the rest of the women would follow blindly just to get in her good graces.
Whoa, slow down. You mean you want Mrs. Henry Cortland to organize an auxiliary in Whitney Hills?
Right.
And you want me to approach her?
Yes, but not formally. I'll do that in time. But it'd help so much if I knew a little bit about her personality especially. Oh, this is so important. I don't want to take a chance of muffing it.
What makes you think I won't muff it?
You can go in your official capacity as a journalist. Mm-hmm. Explain to her that you write a column about the women of our town, and you hope she'll be gracious enough to give you an interview.
Funny, I haven't done that anyway.
Not at all. She's a woman of mystery. No one likes to cross the unknown.
But I'm volunteering.
I knew you would.
Oh, you tricked me into saying that.
I'm drying faster than you're washing.
Major Long, you're always ahead of me. But I wouldn't have it any other way.
Then you'll do it?
Oh, I'll advance and fire as soon as I see the whites of her butler's eyes.
Oh, you're a darling.
I'm out of my mind. Here I worry about my husband driving all over the country on those selling trips. And I'm risking my life for the Salvation Army, right in my own backyard.
And
don't tell me. It's a good cause, and I know it. Oh, seriously, Major, after hearing some of the reports tonight, I often wonder what the world would be like without the work of the Salvation Army.
Then there would be someone else doing God's work. I think he meant it to be that way.
Which reminds me, I followed up that missing persons description in the war cry, the one I told you about.
Yes?
False, as usual.
Don't give up. You'll realize your ambition someday.
Oh, I'm beginning to wonder. I've been suspecting people of fitting those missing persons descriptions for 14 years and never found one yet.
Well, you just find Mrs. Henry Cortland at home tomorrow, and you may have a whole new hobby.
I feel lucky about that, Major Long. And you know why? I'm washing faster than you're drying. Well, here goes nothing.
Yes?
Oh, hello. I'm Mrs. J. Mrs. Curtis J.
How do you do, Mrs. J?
Oh, then you must be Mrs. Cortland. Mrs. Henry Cortland?
Well,
I mean, this is the Cortland residence.
yes it is. Won't you come in?
Well, then, of course you're Mrs. Cortland. Oh, excuse me for seeming so flustered. I expected a butler or someone in a maid's uniform. Oh, well, that is...
Of course. Through here. Into the library, please.
Oh, I hope I'm not interfering.
No, not at all. Matter of fact, I've been quite lonely.
My, what a lovely room.
Yes, I'm very happy here. So many memories back home. Can I offer you something?
No, thank you. Not a thing.
I'm almost glad you said that. I'm all alone here, and I'd have to leave you while I prepared something.
Alone?
Yes, the chauffeur and butler are winding up some of the Cortland affairs and bringing some personal possessions that couldn't be entrusted to ordinary movers.
Oh, of course.
And my upstairs maid, her mother became ill, so she's visiting her.
And the downstairs maid?
Well, the truth of the matter is I don't have one as yet.
With such a large place, it must be difficult for you, Mrs. Cortland.
Well, I don't mind. Helps keep me occupied. Pantry and freezer are fully stocked. I could survive indefinitely here. Provided I remember to thaw out the food in time for the next meal.
Mrs. Cortland, I must admit I'm greatly relieved now that I finally met you.
Oh, I dare say there are all sorts of devastating rumors about me.
Well, let's say the community has been anxious to know more about you. You see, I write a column about the women of our town for the local paper. Well, naturally, anyone in Whitney Hills is of particular interest to my readers.
You've shown remarkable restraint in not coming sooner.
Well, I heard of your recent loss. I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you. Of course, I am somewhat at loose ends. You see, I was very active in my husband's business, but I sold out a large part of my interest to partners in the firm. It may have been a mistake, for I have far too much time on my hands now.
Well, I can understand that.
You know, in a way, that's why I'm glad the servants are gone. Actually, I adore keeping home. But it's been so long since I've had the opportunity. So very long.
Mrs. Cortland, you're making me say something I hadn't planned to.
Please do.
I did come to interview you for my column, but I have something else in mind, too. Mrs. Cortland, are you by any chance familiar with the Women's Auxiliary?
No, I'm afraid not.
It's an activity of the Salvation Army. In a matter of speaking, it's much like a women's club with speakers, programs, and the usual exchange of ideas, fellowship, and things of mutual interest.
Sounds very interesting.
Well, in addition to this, we have projects and do handicraft work, anything that can help the Salvation Army aid those who come to them in need.
Well, how perfectly wonderful.
We think so. It's the kind of group where actually everybody benefits.
I suppose you have to be a member of the Salvation Army to join.
No, membership is completely unrestricted. Well, I'll confess right off, Mrs. Cortland, that what I'm about to propose wasn't my idea originally, although now I wish it had been.
You'd like me to join this auxiliary?
Oh, more than that. You see, the Salvation Army has a wonderful woman in this area, Major Long. Oh, she's a darling, and I know you'd be crazy about her. Well, one of her pet ambitions is to have an auxiliary chapter here in Whitney Hills.
I see. And I think I understand. The town's most influential people live out here. They could be of inestimable help to your projects.
Yes, but at the same time, as Major Long so often said, an auxiliary would be something you and your friends could also benefit from.
You know, I fully agree with your Major Long. The satisfaction of helping others is more rewarding than anything I know.
Oh, we so hoped you'd feel that way. I'm sure Major Long will want to talk to you. But what you'll ask is that you help organize a women's auxiliary here in Whitney Hills.
I see. Yes, I suppose I could have a tea some afternoon. Invite 15 or 20 of the women here. Yes. Yes, why not? This very Saturday, as a matter of fact.
Mrs. Cortland, you're wonderful.
Nonsense.
Major Long and I will give you all the help you'll need. Oh, I'm sure she'll call on you before Saturday.
She'll need to tell me more about this auxiliary and a lot of things.
Well, I'll be running along. I want to tell Major Long the good news right away. Oh, and before I go, Mrs. Cortland, one personal question, if you don't mind.
Anything.
Do you like caviar?
I detest it.
Oh, Mrs. Cortland, we're going to get along just fine. And, of course, I had no intention of mentioning the auxiliary, but she was so warm and receptive, I just found the words coming out.
You did the right thing. I'm afraid that even I was so carried away with this woman of mystery routine, it never occurred to me to make a simple and direct approach.
I told her you'd pay her a call before Saturday and promised we'd both help with the preparations. Can you imagine? Not a single servant in that huge place.
From what you say, I get the feeling she's a woman who can do things for herself.
Oh, you'll like her. You know, she's quite a bit younger than I expected. Why, mid-30s at the most.
Strange. I hadn't the slightest idea what her age was.
Oh, and very attractive. Poor darling, she does have a severe birthmark on her neck just below her ear. She wears her hair to cover it up, but I still couldn't help... Reddish birthmark on neck below ear. 34 years old. 5'2", brunette. Luella Wilburn, that was it.
What in heaven's name are you talking about?
It's amazing. If I didn't know she was Mrs. Henry Cortlandt, I'd say she was Luella Wilburn. The description fits to a T.
Don't they always, Mrs.
Oh,
J?
you can relax. I have no intention of reporting Mrs. Cortlandt as a missing person.
Hardly, because it looks like we've just found her. Now, I realize, ladies, no matter how much I may say here this afternoon, many of you will still have questions about the Red Shield Youth Auxiliary. I hope that during the remainder of our get-together, you'll feel free to approach me with them. And now, I feel very privileged to present our gracious hostess, the lovely lady who's made all this possible, Mrs. Henry Cortlandt.
Thank you so much, Major Long. Oh, goodness, I hardly open my mouth when I get the bell. With no staff here, I hope you'll excuse me a moment.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, and Blackburn.
Yes, ma'am.
I know you must be exhausted, so you take a rest now, and we'll unpack tomorrow.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I'll do that.
Oh, hello, Libby. Good to see you.
I didn't expect you for another week.
Oh, I couldn't take another day of it. I told Blackburn and Paul to rest a while. Libby, what on earth are all those women doing in there?
Well, you see,
Hello. I think we thought everybody was here. We would have waited. I'm Major Long. Perhaps Mrs. Cortlandt here has mentioned me to you.
Mrs. Cortlandt?
Yes, may I present our hostess, Mrs. Henry Cortlandt?
If I
I don't know what's going on here, but I happen to be Mrs. Henry Cortlandt.
The curtain falls in the first act of the remarkable incident at Whitney Hills, starring Monty Margetts as Major Long. You know, over the past years, women's groups have become a very real force for good in our country. Among these groups is one which, under the auspices of the Salvation Army, has done a lot of good in our country. This organization, called the Women's Auxiliary of the Salvation Army, undertakes the sponsorship of the Army projects, such as the Booth Memorial Hospital, an emergency lodge, or a youth association, and help secure equipment or better the physical setup of such institutions. Why not investigate the possibilities of women's auxiliary in your town? Maybe you already have one, or perhaps there's a need for one you didn't realize before. I'm sure that a little investigation would be well worth your time. Now, Act 2 of the remarkable incident at Whitney Hills with Monty Margetts as Major Long.
May I pour you some more tea, Mrs. Cortlandt? There's an awful lot of it.
Thank you, no. I'm embarrassed, Major Long, that we had to meet under such awkward circumstances. You know, the town of Whitney and Whitney Hills is my home now, and I hope to live here quietly.
It's a terrible thing I've done to you, Mrs. Cortlandt. I don't know if I can really explain it.
Well, Libby, I wish you'd try. I don't like to be angry with you. You've been with me 3 years now, and I think we've gotten along beautifully. I've considered you not only a maid, but a friend.
Perhaps it'd be easier for Libby and you too, Mrs. Cortlandt, if explanations waited until tomorrow.
No, I want to do it now, while you're here too, Major Long. I don't really know where to begin. I suppose it started when I found myself in this beautiful home all alone. No phone calls, no shopping, practically nothing to do. I just started imagining it was my home. I took off my maid's uniform, put on my best dress, and I even slept in your room, Mrs. Cortlandt.
Libby, I don't know what to say.
And then that nice Mrs. J rang the bell, and she saw me dressed up.
And just assumed that you were Mrs. Cortlandt.
I don't know what got into me, but I just let her think that's who I was. The feeling of being an important person got to be too much for me, I guess. It was the funniest feeling, though. I felt right stepping into your shoes, Mrs. Cortlandt. Almost as though I belonged there. One thing led to another, and there I was, planning to use your stationery to invite all those women here. I didn't expect you for another week.
But, Libby, what would you have done then?
I don't know. I didn't even let myself think about that, Mrs. Cortlandt. Oh, it was a crazy, terrible thing, and I'm very sorry I did it. You don't have to say anything. I'll resign, of course.
Mrs. Cortlandt, I can't help thinking there wasn't really much harm done by Libby's actions. Embarrassment, yes, certainly, but there was compensation. For a short while, somebody was happy. Happiness for some is a very elusive thing. I think we have to at least be sympathetic when someone goes after it, so long as it does no serious harm to anyone else. Your embarrassment will be forgotten in time, but Libby, who was just radiant earlier today, can never forget the happiness she found just in pretending. Anyway, Mrs. Cortlandt proved to be very understanding. She refused Libby's resignation and insisted the whole thing be forgotten.
Well, that sure turned out to be a fiasco with a capital F.
Nothing anybody could have foreseen.
I hadn't opened my big mouth that first day I went over there and waited for you.
Nonsense. There wasn't a reason in the world to doubt Libby. Even at the tea, she had all the poise and charm you would have expected from a woman in Mrs. Cortlandt's position.
Isn't that remarkable when you think about it? If I had to entertain a group like that, I'd fall flat on my face.
Oh, come on now. Were they so different?
No. I'll have to admit I liked everyone I talked to very much. I felt right at home. But we sure can put the idea of a youth auxiliary in the future file. The distant future.
I hate to admit defeat, but what happened is bound to reflect on us. Let me see. I want to write a note to Mrs. Cortlandt and offer to reimburse her for whatever expenses there were in the way of food.
Good idea. You know, I still can't get over Libby. She was the perfect prototype of a socialite. Charming, gracious, a good conversationalist.
Did you notice she could talk intelligently on almost any subject?
I sure wouldn't want to have her for a maid. She'd give me an inferiority complex.
I suppose, though, she's had ample opportunity in the last 3 years to observe Mrs. Cortlandt in the role of hostess.
Well, that explains part of it. 3 years. I wonder what she did before that.
Mrs. J, you have a familiar glint in your eye.
I just thought of something I have to attend to. And you know what? This time I'm going to hit the jackpot.
Hello? Mrs. J, where have you been? I haven't seen you in 3 weeks. Oh, not that again. Yes, I'll be here, but who is this that you want me to meet? All right, I'll be surprised. Goodbye.
Major Lawton, this is Mr. John Wilburn.
How are you, Mr. Wilburn?
Nice meeting you, Major.
Mr. Wilburn is from Maple Grove, which happens to be less than 50 miles from where the Cortlandts lived before she moved out here.
Mrs. J, you didn't have Mr. Wilburn come all the way here on a wild goose chase.
We'll see who laughs last this time.
I don't know the situation, Mr. Wilburn, but I feel that I must warn you that Mrs. J has been determined to spot a missing person for over 14 years.
Begging your pardon, Major, but I know that. And I have every reason to believe that she's finally succeeded.
Really?
I've been married for 10 years. My wife, Luella, lost a baby in childbirth nearly 4 years ago. She wanted that baby desperately, and so did I.
I'm so sorry.
Luella came home, but she wasn't the same. Stayed in her room, refused to see anybody. Then she just disappeared. I wasn't home at the time, just the maid was there, and she didn't even see her leave. I'm fairly well off financially. In addition to the police, I hired private detectives, but they never found her. The doctors suspected amnesia. A few months ago, someone told me that Salvation Army publications carry reports of missing persons, and I solicited their help.
You remember, Major, I told you how perfectly the description fit Libby when we thought she was Mrs. Cortland.
Yes, I suppose I do.
The description is perfect in every detail, Major, especially the birthmark on her neck.
And Libby started working for Mrs. Cortland just about the time she disappeared.
Well, it certainly would explain the ease with which she handled the party that afternoon.
Mrs. J told me about that, Major, and it does fit Luella. She was a wonderful hostess and a very intelligent woman.
I have to admit, Mrs. J, I guess you did hit the jackpot. But we dare not jump to conclusions, Mr. Wilburn. It could be a coincidence, and the disappointment for you would be terrible.
Oh, it could be, Major, but there's something else. When Luella disappeared, she had on a watch that I gave her, and there was an inscription to L.W. with love, J.W.
L.W.? Don't you see, Major? Luella Wilburn. Libby Williams.
That sounds possible.
But we need your help now, Major.
Anything, of course.
I don't quite know how to approach her. I'm afraid the sudden sight of me might not be the best thing. Now, if you could call on her, help her to remember, sort of ease her into the idea that she's really Luella Wilburn.
Of course, if she is an amnesia victim, she may know that much about herself.
Yes, she will.
First of all, I'd better call Mrs. Cortland and let her know what the visit will be about.
Good idea. You'll want to be alone with her.
Well, Mr. Wilburn, I can imagine how anxious you must be. I'll call her this very minute. Libby, it's certainly good to see you again.
Well, that's very generous of you after what I did, Major.
Now, I hoped we'd never even mention that again. Libby, I've come on a rather extraordinary errand.
If there's anything I can do to make up for...
No. Nothing like that. Libby, if you don't mind my asking, what did you do before you worked for Mrs. Cortland?
I had similar positions.
In Maple Grove?
Maybe. Why do you ask?
Then you're familiar with Maple Grove. Libby, did you ever know anyone named Luella Wilburn?
Then you know. How did you find out?
You mean you know you're really Luella Wilburn?
Yes, I know.
Those who were close to you assumed you had amnesia.
They were right, I did. Well, actually, it was after the party a few weeks ago that everything came back to me. I guess it was entertaining again, doing things that were so familiar to me. After you left, I went to my room. I had a frightful headache, but I knew if I worked hard enough, I'd remember who I was. I fell asleep, woke up suddenly. In the quiet of my room, I said aloud, I'm Luella Wilburn.
But you've done nothing about it in these last few weeks.
I don't know what to do. I lost a baby in childbirth, Major. A baby my husband wanted more than anything in this world. We waited nearly 7 years for that baby. Then I let him down. Oh, I can't see how he could want me anymore. I've just about decided it's best I remain Libby Williams.
Because you think your husband doesn't love you anymore.
I don't see how he could.
I'm very happy to say, Luella, you're wrong. Very wrong. He's done everything in his power these last 3 years to find you.
You know this?
I do. He flew here as soon as he suspected you may be the wife he's been searching for.
John is here?
Yes.
Oh, Major, I'm so happy.
Why don't you go change into that best dress of yours? He's right outside in the car.
Major, I'm frightened.
So is he. Go on now. Get that radiant look I saw the day of the party.
God bless you, Major.
Major, I heard Libby run out. Is it...
You're going to need a new maid, Mrs. Cortland.
Then she is the missing woman?
Yes.
Oh, Major, this is the most thrilling moment I can remember. How wonderful for her. After 3 years to be back with her husband. Wonderful.
Please, Mrs. Cortland, you'll have me crying, too. And I haven't done that since I was a lieutenant.
I have the strangest feeling, Major. One of complete uselessness. After 14 years, I finally located a missing person. And I know it'll never happen again.
Just think of the happiness you brought those two people, and then tell me you feel useless.
Oh, I guess you're right. Oh, I'll miss Libby or Luella or... We saw her a total of 3 times and knew her by a different alias each time.
Something occurred to me. This is the first time an auxiliary that didn't even exist had a chance to help someone.
True. I think I'll use that for the lead in my column and send you the clipping.
Come in.
Good morning, Major Long.
Mrs. Cortlandt.
May I come in?
Certainly.
I'd better be running along.
Oh, not on my account, Mrs. J. As a matter of fact, what I have to say not only isn't private, but I want the world to know.
Well, then I'll stay.
Please sit down, Mrs. Cortlandt.
Thank you. Major, I was very touched when Libby Luella was reunited with her husband. You see, the event had a personal significance to me. You've heard that I moved here to Whitney to help overcome the grief I felt at the death of my husband. That was a lie. Actually, I ran away because I was humiliated and couldn't face my friends. My husband has money. He doesn't really have to work at all. I think that's his downfall. You see, he drinks. To excess, I'm afraid.
I begin to understand, Mrs. Cortlandt.
One day, 4 months ago, he left the house in a drunken stupor. He'd done that before, but was never gone more than a day or two. After the 4th day, I started lying to our friends, told them he was on an extended business trip. I couldn't bear to face the humility. At the end of a week, in a fit of rage, I decided to move as far away as possible.
And so you came to Whitney Hills?
Yes. I planned to remain aloof, so I wouldn't have to tell the truth about my marriage. Also, I needed time to know what to do about our problem. I'm a very proud woman, Major. The disgrace was almost more than I could bear. But then, seeing the reunion the other day, I suddenly realized my pride was very false indeed. In spite of everything, I love my husband very much. At first, I felt that he deserted me. But now I realize it's the other way around.
What do you want to do, Mrs. Cortlandt?
I want to find him, bring him home, here to Whitney Hills. I think the two of us, away from the environment where all our trouble started, the two of us can work things out. I want your help. The police, Missing Persons Bureau, whoever or whatever it is that handles cases like this.
The Salvation Army can usually be a big help in finding someone who's an excessive drinker.
Then you will help, Major?
Of course. I may need to call on you for some details, but I think I can take most of the burden off your hands. Besides, we have a dedicated and experienced assistant in Mrs. J here.
I'll contact our Missing Persons Bureau for you right away.
You're both as wonderful as Libby said. And that brings up another thing. Libby was telling me the details of the auxiliary you were planning. You know, in a way, I'm responsible for its failure to be organized. While you're helping me find my husband, will you please tell me what to do so that I can start a Red Shield Youth Auxiliary?
So ends the final act of the remarkable incident at Whitney Hills with Monty Margetts as Major Long. Be sure and stay tuned to this station next week at the same time for another Heartbeat Theater story. Heartbeat Theater is a presentation of the Salvation Army. Until next week, this is your host, C.P. McGregor, saying thanks for listening and have a happy week ahead.
Heartbeat Theater has come to you through the worldwide facilities of the United States Armed Forces Radio and Television Service.